Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's vow for a swift response to the synagogue attack starts shaping up as Israel moves ahead with measures to revoke certain rights of terrorist families. The Prime Minister had a cabinet meeting over the prospects of nullifying the national ID number of the family members who allegedly supported the attack. Netanyahu's government further plans to extend the firearms permit by allowing thousands of civilians to carry their own licensed weapons.
בשם כל אזרחי ישראל אני מבקש לשלוח תנחומים מעומק הלב למשפחות הנרצחים בפיגוע הנתעב והנורא בירושלים בירתנו. בפיגוע נפשע בפתח בית כנסת ביום השואה הבינלאומי.
Jerusalem witnessed its deadliest terror attack in over a decade, which left 7 people dead outside a synagogue. According to reports, the 21-year-old man opened fire at people who had gathered to pray. The following day, a 13-year-old boy was shot. In fact, he shot and wounded 2 people before being shot himself. The 7 victims of the synagogue massacre have been identified. The dead include a 14-year-old boy who was laid to rest by the mourners. According to Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, a Ukrainian woman who was working as a caretaker was amongst those who've been killed. No terror group has taken responsibility for this attack so far. According to reports, following a brief car chase, the 21-year-old assailant was later shot dead by the police. The synagogue killings took place just a day after an Israeli raid in the West Bank city of Jenin that killed 9 Palestinians. The gunman was allegedly a relative of a 17-year-old Palestinian who was shot dead in clashes with Israeli forces in a Jerusalem refugee camp. The killer arrived at night and opened fire with a handgun, hitting a number of people before he was killed by the police. According to reports, 42 suspects, including the family members, have been arrested. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has urged people not to take law into their own hands. He said the cabinet has decided to pursue sanctions against families of attackers. The shooting coincides with the International Holocaust Remembrance Day and has drawn widespread condemnation, including from Washington, the United Nations and Israel's Arab and Western allies.
התגובה שלנו תהיה חזקה, מהירה ומדויקת. מי שינסה לפגוע בנו, אנחנו נפגע בו ובכל מי שמסייע לו. כבר ביצענו מעצרים נרחבים של תומכי טרור, סייענים ומסיתים. אנחנו פורסים כוחות, אנחנו מתגברים כוחות, ואנחנו עושים זאת בזירות השונות. נאטום ונהרוס בתי מחבלים בהליך מזורז, כדי לגבות מחיר נוסף מאלה שתמכו בטרור. התהליך הזה כבר החל אתמול, והוא נמצא בעיצומו. אני אביא הערב בפני הקבינט צעדים נוספים למאבק בטרור. זה כולל זירוז והרחבה באופן משמעותי של רישוי נשק לאזרחים מורשים. כפי שראינו פעם אחר פעם, כולל הבוקר, הדבר הזה מציל חיים. כמו כן אביא בפני הקבינט שלילת זכויות בביטוח הלאומי למשפחות תומכי טרור. הממשלה תפעל בתקיפות, בנחישות ובעוצמה נגד הטרור. יהיו גם כמובן אמצעים נוספים שנדווח בסוף הקבינט.
For more on this story, we're now joined by Makhaimar Abu Sada, a professor of political science at Al-Azhar University in Gaza. Thank you so much for speaking to WION. Now, we've been reporting for weeks now how 2022 was the deadliest year in over a decade in the West Bank. And 2023 has begun on an equally bad and ominous note. Both sides blame each other for the escalating violence. How do you view the latest developments, the heavy crackdown by the Benjamin Netanyahu government, the fact that the suspects' families are being arrested, they may have a lot of their rights revoked, and a lot of people, a lot of Israelis are now being given the right to carry licensed weapons. There is criticism coming in from some of Israel's Western allies as well. How do you see this?
Well, first of all, many thanks for having me in your program. And let me start by saying that according to the UN, as you just stated, the year 2022 was the deadliest for the Palestinians since the Second Intifada, which ended in 2004. Last year, Israel killed more than 220 Palestinians in the West Bank and in Gaza. More than 170 Palestinians were very much executed by the Israeli army and Israeli settlers. And also this year has been also very rough for the Palestinians. The new government, which is led by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, has been in office only for 1 month now, and more than 30 Palestinians have been killed by the Israeli army and Israeli security forces, including 10 Palestinians were killed in the city of Jenin on Thursday morning, including an elderly woman who is above the age of 60, was also shot dead by the Israeli army and security services. What we are witnessing is an Israeli aggression against the Palestinians, which has been going on for many decades now. Israel occupied the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem in June of 1967. And for the past 55 years, Israel has continued its occupation on Palestinian land. Israel, in addition to that, has continued to build Israeli settlement or Jewish settlement for Israeli settlers in the West Bank, in which more than 800,000 Israeli Jewish settlers have been implanted in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. I don't want to mention other things which include house demolition of the Palestinians, collective punishment of Palestinian prisoners, an apartheid system which has been imposed by Israel on the Palestinians in West Bank, which has been documented by Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, who have indicated what Israel is doing against the Palestinians in the West Bank and East Jerusalem accounts to an apartheid system against the Palestinians, where there are two sets of laws for the Palestinians that restrict the Palestinians and other laws for Israeli Jewish settlers. This environment, this political environment, has resulted in a lot of Palestinian anger, where we see Palestinian youth who have decided to take matters on their own hands and to revenge for the death of their own families and relatives.
There is a lot of anger. One can understand that, Professor Abu Sauda. And yes, you know, the history of Israel-Palestine conflict is a very, very complex one. But, you know, going by the events of 2022 and just the first month of 2023, it is very clear that the situation is worsening by the day. You also have in place a government in Israel which is described as the most far-right government ever. That has also given rise to fears that there could in fact be further escalation of violence and tensions. In a situation such as this, what do you expect the West in particular to do? Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, is in Egypt. We are given to understand he is trying to diffuse tensions. What would you want the West, especially Israel's allies, to do in this situation?
Thank you very much for bringing this up. Yes, the Palestinians and the international community very much are facing one of the most extreme Israeli government in the history of Israel. For the first time, we have ministers in this Israeli government who are classified as racist and fascist members of this Israeli government. Ministers like Itamar Ben-Gvir and also another minister, Bezalel Smotrich, who belong to a political party in Israel called Jewish Zionism. These ministers are calling clearly for the death of Arabs, for the expulsion of the Palestinians from their own homes and their own territory. And that's why the U.S. government has decided to begin with not to deal with Itamar Ben-Gvir, who is now serving as the national security minister in the state of Israel, and also Smotrich, who is serving as Minister of Finance. The U.S. government has decided to boycott these two ministers because they have clearly stated racist and fascist statements against the Palestinians. Now, what we expect from the international community is to isolate this Israeli government, because it doesn't make any sense that the international community has boycotted Hamas, which is considered a terrorist group by the international community.
Right.
And in the meantime, we have fascist, racist groups in the current Israeli government who must be isolated and boycotted, and put pressure on this Israeli government to kick them out, because those are racist ministers who are calling for the annexation of Palestinian land and for the killing of Palestinians and Arabs, clearly, as Itamar Ben-Gvir has done so just 2 nights ago.
Itamar Ben-Gvir is a very, very controversial minister who's made some very controversial statements. His actions in the recent past have been extremely controversial as well. We'll really have to wait and see what more the West can do in the days and weeks ahead to defuse the tensions between the two sides. We certainly would like to see an end to the violence, which unfortunately is escalating by the day. Professor Abu Sauda, thank you so much for speaking to WION.
Thank you.